All right. So, so for tonight, we continue on this series, just talking about different spirits and effectively going through deliverance on them. And as we've been talking about demons, I've brought up wrath a couple of times, how we were going to go over it, and here we are. We're doing it, guys. Doing it. So there are a couple scriptures to look at real quick, and they'll kind of frame the context for what we need to talk about, because this one's a kind of a deeper, there's some deeper context to this that need to be kind of fleshed out before we kind of progress to talk about like the demons involved, because there's a lot of stigma around anger itself as an emotion, as a aspect of life as a Christian. There are some pastors out there who would say that anger itself is a sin. There are some who look at anger as being a gateway to sin. There are some who look at anger as completely valid and absolutely something that you should nurse in order to make yourself a better Christian. I've literally heard the full gambit.
It's like Star Wars, you know? The dark side.
Yeah, hatred makes you stronger.
I like that one.
Well, that's going to be on the video. Good. Let that hate flow through you. So, yeah, like Star Wars. Thank you for that, Andy.
Yeah, too much anger and you go crazy.
It's a thing. Like, so, in order to kind of frame this, a couple verses to start off with. The first one should be in no way, shape, or form like news to anyone. Matthew 5, verse 21. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell.'" Of course, this is the NIV. Other translations will say, anyone who is angry with their brother or sister has already committed murder in their heart. Yeah. Another one to kind of like help us frame this is Ephesians 4:26. "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." So a couple things to look to kind of flesh this out, because we have to talk about anger itself, because it's important to draw a distinction between anger, rage, wrath, different things like that, vengeance. Because all of these do kind of factor into this discussion, because the demons involved in this, the title of the message is Wrath, but really the demons we're talking about are the ones behind rage. We use wrath because it's one of the 7 deadly sins as listed out by the Catholics. And it's one of the most familiar to people. And ultimately, when you break it all down, when you look beyond subtext, it's all the same thing. It's action driven by anger in order to placate the individual acting. The demons who push us those ways will use these various components, and they will use anger more than anything else in order to motivate us to behave in ways that they desire us to behave. So, whether that be through anger, vengeance, or offense, any of these things will be used in order to try to move us away from God and into a world of our own, separate from Him, and completely encased in a sort of realm crafted of our own minds, of our own emotions, and of our own feelings, built and fed, fueled by anger. It takes a bit to get there, but it's not as much as a lot of people would like to think. And I think for a lot of us, COVID was a fantastic demonstration of exactly how little it takes to get people into that exact place. There were a lot of very angry people, and now there are a lot of very angry, broken people. After spending a year locked in their houses, dealing with emotions that they didn't know how to deal with, dealing with the feeling of being powerless, among other things. It's hard. So first off, to talk about anger, to kind of frame this. Anger in and of itself is not a sin. Paul writes in Ephesians, we just looked at the verse, he says the simple point, do not sin in your anger. There's nothing wrong with anger. He draws a delineation between sin and anger as being two separate things. After all, if it was a sin to be angry, then God would be guilty of sin. If you've ever read any of the prophets, any of them, at all, you will find God angry. He says he's angry. And as a result, if you believe that anger is a sin, then you have to come to terms with the fact that you believe that God is a sinner. That's a whole other subject, and that's going to be between you and Him. Anger as itself is an emotion. It is an emotional response to any number of different stimuli, whether it is pain, whether it's injustice, whether it is any kind of wrongdoing that's been applied to us. Anger as an emotion is very insidious, though. See, the thing about it is that in the correct context, it is a great motivator. Anger in the right context, in the context of one who loves, would drive them to protect, would drive them to save, would drive them to fight for those that they need to fight for, that they love, that they have passion for, whether it is the individuals, whether it's their family, whether it is their church, whether it is their community, it doesn't matter. But anger can be an incredibly motivating emotion. And that's important, because that's in its design. When God acted out of anger, when Jesus acted out of anger, it was for good purpose. It was in order to preserve that which was meant to be preserved. Let's not forget that we have one particular instance of an angry Jesus, and it involved him walking into the temple and finding it full of people selling things, and among other things. He proceeded to, and a lot of people miss this part, he proceeded to walk away and go and craft a whip. He didn't just find something laying around, he went and made it. And then he came back and he chased everybody out, angrily yelling at them about them turning his father's house into a den of thieves. This was an act of anger. It was an act meant, however, the action involved was in order to preserve the righteousness and the holiness of God's temple. That is what anger in a right context looks like. When it motivates us to do good things. It might look aggressive, but aggression isn't wrong in and of itself either. It's all in how you use it. If a man sees one of his just recently I read an article actually where a little girl got sent home from a Christian school with no pants. Her dad, a very large, muscular cop, was rightfully upset. In his anger, he drove to the school and demanded from the principal to know why. The principal pointed him to a rule that denoted that the school could remove any article of clothing that had any kind of insignia that represented something that was against the school's morals. The little girl's pants had rainbows on them. Now, the little girl she's like 8 years old. She has no affiliation with LGBTQ community in any way, shape, or form, or any idea. She just liked rainbows, so she got pants with rainbows on them. And as a result, the school took the pants because they misappropriated the meaning. So Dad, after finding out why, proceeded to start an online petition, proceeded to bring everything up in front of the state legislation, proceeded to go ahead and just roast this school in every which way that he could in order to get justice and to make sure that they never did something like this before. Again, he was rightfully angry. His little girl got sent home with no pants, ridiculed and mocked by the other kids. It was not a good look. All because the school made a poor judgment. See, anger as a motivator can motivate us to do incredibly good things. Anger can at times be the motivator to get us to give up sin. When we catch ourselves and we have to consider that we are that dog returning to its vomit, sometimes that makes people angry and it can motivate them to move away from some of the actions, activities, and things that they've been doing. It can move them to want to give up what is keeping them away from God. So there are places where anger is righteous and completely justifiable, and it is even good. When you learn the numbers on like the child sex trade, and that makes you angry, that's righteous. And if it motivates you to start donating to a charity that helps get kids out of that kind of lifestyle, then your anger has moved you to act in a righteous way. If you load up a gun and start shooting random people in the streets, and it did not. The thing about it is that we have to understand the context of anger as being in and of itself a strong emotion and a motivator. That is the context by which God would have us use it. That's the context that God uses it in. To bring up offenses, to cause us to confront problems. Anger can motivate us to do that because sometimes a lot of times there are problems that will come up and we won't confront them. If we're not angry about it, we won't confront it. Sometimes if we're angry about it and we're worried that we'll act too aggressive or too something out of our anger, we might not confront it still, but we'll want to. Something will need to change. I know that for myself, I oftentimes have to go take a minute and calm down before I go confront something so that I can think it through and then actually address it mindfully. But that's also just training. It's not always necessary to do that. It's just, I've trained myself to do it more than anything because I used to have a really bad temper. This whole message will end up being a little bit more hitting home a little more for me than most, I think, just because of my past and where I've been in that past. So, to kind of clear up the context of anger itself not being a sin, it's what you do with it that will lead you into sin. See, when Jesus highlights the point that whoever's been angry with their brother or sister, the context for that applies the idea that you're holding resentment. See, anger in the wrong context will lead us to feelings of wanting to hurt people. It will lead us to feelings of wanting to humiliate people, of wanting to cause other people pain. This is when we get into states of being vengeful, being vindictive. Anger can make us cruel, especially in those contexts. Anger in the wrong context can make us hateful, wrathful. It can cause us to go into rage, and it can cause us to behave in so many different ways that are corrupt in their own way. When Jesus talks about it, he clarifies this point that in these things, in this context, it will be a sin. So what do we do with it in those situations? If you catch yourself in anger at somebody and your desire is to hurt them, what do you do? So, the thing one should do in all situations is to try to gain context, but more than anything, to take it to God. Because sometimes the offenses do not match the amount of anger. If somebody cuts you off in traffic and your immediate thought is that you need to chase them down and then knock out their headlights with a baseball bat, that is probably not parallel to the crime. You know what I mean? The thing about it is that even though anger can be a powerful motivator, it can also be a powerful tool of the enemy. See, the thing about it is that anger can get you really, really far in the world without God. You'd be shocked. Somebody with a chip on their shoulder, carrying that around for years, it can be incredible how far that chip can take them as they have to prove themselves to everyone and try to rub it in the face of somebody somewhere who insulted them at some point. It can also sabotage them many, many times over, because that anger, that need to prove something, will be a problem. And this is where we kind of get into our subject matter, because where we outline anger in and of itself, we have to draw a line between anger and these other things: rage, wrath, vengeance, vindictiveness, cruelty. All of these things are fed by anger in various different ways. Now, the demons involved in this, the demons that we're talking about, demons of rage, demons of wrath, they aim to harness that emotion on our part and motivate us in the wrong direction. Much like other demons that we've talked about, they will use different tactics in order to try to move us away from God or move us into our own place. The spirits that we're talking about in this context, rage spirits, they aim to take something that is natural and can be good and twist it in such a way that it will move us away from the way that God would intend it. This is where you get from oh, I just learned about child sex trafficking. I want to donate to a program that's working on it, or, I want to help fund the police, or, any different number of different things like that, to I'm going to load up my shotgun, I'm going to drive out to the streets of Portland, and we're going to go hunting. You can justify both. And that's the problem right there. See, these demons of rage, they want to move us into a specific kind of place. I reference it at the beginning, which is this place of this little, like, our own little realm, our own little bubble, where it's fueled by our own anger, but it makes us deaf to anything else. See, the thing about anger is if it's allowed to fester, if it's allowed to become something else, if it becomes rage or wrath, it becomes blinding and deafening. We can't see or hear outside of it. All we can perceive is what causes us the pain or the anger. It's this thing where it's like a wound that's just throbbing. And it's hard to focus on anything else. You try to distract yourself, but it's still there in the back of your mind, just pounding and pounding, and the pain is just there. And whether that pain is physical pain because somebody wronged you, or if it's something more of an offense or a crime or an injustice or something like that, something that eats at your insides, it's the same thing. And these spirits would harness it and justify you to stay in that place, because their end goal is to move you into that place of deafness and blindness. Because when you are deaf and blind and you're justified by your anger, they can use you. They can use you in any way, shape, or form because they've cut you off from God. I use the term bubble because that's effectively what you find yourself in. You find yourself in a bubble, closed off from the Holy Spirit, or any way that God's going to try to move you. You might even be able to recognize that you can't hear from Him. But it won't matter, because the distraction is so great. Again, it's that throbbing wound. You're too busy licking this wound, trying to make it feel better, trying to save yourself, to be able to grab yourself and say, I need out. It's all an elaborate trap. And that's where they aim to take you. They want to use, just like when we talked about fear, the way that fear will take a raw emotion, like basically they're attacking a part of your brain that you don't have any control over. It's effectively the subconscious. These spirits are similar in that effect. It's just that anger isn't as subconscious of an emotion, but it is a very powerful emotion. So once they can harness it, they can use it. Now the trouble that we end up running into here, it's 8:37. Okay. So the trouble that we end up running into with this is that it can separate us from God. It will separate us from God, and what's more is it will justify us in the face of God. See, we become, in that state of anger, it becomes really easy to look to God and the people around us and tell them why we are right. And because that emotion is so strong, it acts as a form of validation. See, because we feel so strongly, we feel more validated in that emotional state. And we're looking for reasons to say why we're right. This is why, why we see a lot of what we see in the world around us right now. There are a lot of people who are very offended, And they've been able to take those offenses and they've been able to add justification to them. And as a result, they find themselves feeling that they are very correct in their assertions and in their beliefs, even to the point that they can act in ways that are completely unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. And yet, they can justify it because they are correct in their own minds. This is what happens to us when spirits of anger, when spirits of rage have been allowed to take control of the situation, to use our anger against us, to twist it, to form it. And the thing about it is that, like we've talked about with other demons, they don't come alone. They come in teams. Have a good night. When we talk about like vengeance, for example, we'll come back to vengeance again, because at some point we're going to have to talk about judgment, because these two work together. Vengeance as a concept sits in between these two. It's kind of like the hate this. If rage is the jelly, judgment is the peanut butter, and they come together to make a fantastic sandwich that tastes super good, but also gums up our teeth and does other terrible things. That's vengeance. They team up. Judgment says, this is unjust. Rage says, you should hurt them for it. Vengeance. And in that place, it moves us into a place of godhood. And this is kind of the important thing. This is why these demons are so capable of affecting people the way they are. It's that it moves us into a state. There's something about having the clarity of vision, of believing that you are correct, that can be utilized very easily by the demonic. See, the thing about it is if you're throwing everything at God's feet, you don't always get the vindication that you want. Quite simply, when God says it is mine to avenge, and we say, okay, please avenge, and he doesn't in the way that we would want him to, it can be incredibly unsatisfying. Hey God, my boss fired me unceremoniously and then lied about the grievance committee. Like, he literally brought people into the grievance committee meeting who were not part of the grievance committee because I was friends with half the grievance committee, and actually just like manipulated the whole situation in order to keep me fired. God, can you avenge me? And then the guy retires with $1 billion+. It feels unjust. However, that's the place where they'll kind of slip in and start to use anger as a means to motivate us. Paul says that thing in Ephesians there. After he says, do not sin in your anger, he says, do not go to bed angry with your brother or sister. And then he says, do not give the devil a foothold. This is important. I want us to put a little note right there. See, it's in those places of being unsatisfied with the results of God's decisions that the devil will get a foothold. I want it to be understood first and foremost that God is never incorrect in his actions. If he chooses to act in a way, it is because he has a purpose beyond what we see and understand. And what I mean by that is something that he showed me very clearly years ago in order to help me to be able to forgive people. And we will come back to this because this is important for deliverance from these spirits. But being able to like understand why he doesn't act in the ways that we would want him to. I remember distinctly him showing me how there were people who hurt me in the past, and he showed me that if he acted as I wanted him to hurt them the way they hurt me, all that would be happening is they would be continuing a cycle that they already lived in. Effectively, some of the people had started their lives with abuse, and as such, all they knew was abuse. And as a result, pain was a chronic aspect of their livelihood, and to suffer for decisions they made would seem righteous, justified, valid, because the only thing that was going to save them was love. So what they needed was somebody to love them despite their actions. Now, I wasn't the person to do that because they hurt me and I was very angry, and there was no way in hell that I was going to be that person. But nevertheless, God showed this to me, so I understood that he was going to be that person. See, when we surrender people to God, when we ask him to avenge us, when we ask him to deal with the people who have hurt us or wronged us in various ways, that means we are surrendering them to him. Effectively, in the same way that Paul says, Paul talks about at one point about surrendering people to the devil. We oftentimes, when we forgive, it is important for us to surrender the people we are forgiving to God and to let him have them. They are no longer ours to deal with. They're his. And when they're his, we take the hands off the wheel and let him handle every facet of what's going to happen with them, because we no longer want that responsibility. Oftentimes we didn't want that responsibility to begin with. However, when we cannot release that, that's when we start taking responsibility. We take a personal interest in what happens to that person because we want them to suffer. We want them to hurt. This is a place where we would need to take ourselves to the side with God and surrender ourselves. If you recognize that that's where you're at, that is a place to surrender to God, because that's not a righteous place. Now, when we leave people to God, it's important for us to leave them with him, to walk away, to turn our backs, to let the whole thing go. Like whenever we sin, we repent and do the 180, that whole thing. Same with the people in life who have created problems for us and that we've chosen to forgive. There might be people in our lives, family, and so on, who we can't necessarily just like cut out. And that's understood. But at the same time, we also don't have to be the person who takes care of them, as it were. I know like one person in particular that comes to mind would be like my mom. I've never been able to just like cut my mom out of my life or anything like that. I've oftentimes been her caretaker. But my mom is somebody who I've had to forgive many, many times. So I've routinely had to like throw her at God's feet and just be like, deal with this. Because if I do, I'll be collecting life insurance a lot earlier than I should be. So, but at the same time, like it became a thing of like creating separation emotionally and spiritually and physically at times in order to be able to let God address the things in my heart and address her. Still see her on Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I didn't mean I needed to spend a lot of time with her in the meantime. You do have a lot more control as adults than we necessarily give ourselves credit for. oftentimes the connection, the driving connection that we feel to be attached to somebody comes out of a very different place. It's not always real. Sometimes it's entirely perceived. It's entirely crafted. It's a soul tie, to put it in Christianese. Now, all that said, when we're dealing with spirits of rage, they're going to preoccupy us with the things that have happened. So, for example, a spirit of rage, upon seeing you ask God to avenge you with this person, or ask God to take this person that you're forgiving, will then proceed to press in everything that that person did and highlight any good that comes to that person after you've surrendered them to God. The reason being is that it wants you to take up the mantle of avenging yourself. It wants you to become the person preoccupied with that person getting their comeuppance. Because after all, they deserve it, right? They hurt you. And I understand that we're talking about very incredibly differing levels of pain. Getting fired and having a grievance committee change is kind of a softball thing compared to what some people have endured from other people and would want God to avenge them for. But it's just an example. The thing about it all is this, is that these demons will push us and push us and push us with the memories of what has happened, what has transpired, in order to try to make us, push us, and use our anger to motivate us in order to behave, in order to act in one way or another, so as to act in a way that is unbecoming of a godly man or woman. To crave vengeance, to crave wrath, and in order to make us become those things. See, it may come as a shock to you guys, most of you being involved in the church, that people can justify really terrible things. They can cherry pick the Bible, it turns out, and they can justify morbid behaviors on the basis that they're doing the will of God. Historically, this might be shocking, with the Templar Order being what they were. The thing about it is that the difference between them and us, see, we look back at these historical examples where people in our lives, and we say, oh, they're terrible, or the Pharisees, because they're always a favorite. You know the difference between us and the Pharisees, right? It's just a little bit of justification. That's all. That's it. That's all it takes. All we need is a little bit of justification, and we go from people following Jesus to people crucifying him. A little bit of religion, a little bit of justification, a few scriptures here and there that are off base or misused, and we're those guys. Rejoicing at his screams. And that's exactly where these demons aim to end us at, because they want us to put ourselves in the place of God. See, the Pharisees were the religious leaders at the time, and they spoke for God. As such, and mind you, them speaking for God was purely a statement of how they felt, what they believed they were doing, not in any way, shape, or form what they were actually doing. In this same context, it's easy for us to end up in that same kind of boat where it's easy for us to end up in that same kind of boat, because where offense is allowed to blossom and grow and fester, it will motivate us to act. And the more that we feel that God is not acting, the more inclined we are to take over for him, as it were. And if we can find a religious justification to do it, then we can argue that we are doing the will of God. And if we are doing the will of God, then we are unquestionably correct. Again, going back to that statement that it's really easy for people to do things, even very criminal things, if we believe we are correct. Sin is no different from anything illegal. We can commit sin, obvious sin, as long as we believe we are justified to do it. If we believe that we are correct, and if we believe that we are correctly following God, we can justify sin as being something that we can get away with doing. And that puts us in the state of being God to ourselves. And that is exactly where these demons want us. Because see, the thing about it is like demons of rage, contrary to what like people might paint them as being, they're not angry. They're not beings that manifest as like raging lava monsters or such things, or fiery beasts. They're far more measured and they're far more calculating. Because their entire game plan, they're very sociopathic, in a word. They are preoccupied with taking your emotions, manipulating them, and then using them to to lock you up. Because their focus is on a powerful, natural emotion that can be used for good, and to twist it and corrupt it in order to lock you up in it. And once they've got you there, they can effectively turn the key and walk away. It's almost like there are some emotions that demons will use against us that it's almost like it's like a wind-up toy. You wind it up and you let it go. They don't have to sit there and like control us. They don't have to sit there and push. It's not like when we talked about spirits of abandonment, where they will like cling to a family member, where they will stick with you for your whole life. Like spirits of wrath, spirits of rage, they can be familiar spirits. Like they can be the kinds that attach themselves to a family and affect each generation after each generation. But the thing about it is that they don't need to be hands-on. This isn't like abandonment, where you have to where they have to continuously show up and like create situations for abandonment. If anger is manipulated, because it is such a strong emotion, and because of the effect that it will have on the person, if they've got you in that bubble, all they need to do is make sure you stay in that bubble. And that's easy, because you're going to keep yourself there. The more offense that you take in, the more fuel for that fire that keeps you warm and cozy inside your little anger bubble, inside your rage cage, if we want to put it that way. And that's all that needs to happen. With other spirits, they have to try so hard. You know, we talk like just to kind of like parallel the two, since both can do this, can serve in this role. Spirits of abandonment will cling to you. They'll attach themselves to you. Rejection will follow you around. It will exist with you. And as a result, it has to constantly feed you lies and show you specific things. It has to take your vision and shift it in order to see rejection. Because you might walk into a room full of people who love you, and it will direct you to the one person who doesn't and doesn't want to be there, so that you can focus on that and then you can carry that rejection. Rage doesn't need to do that. The rage spirits, once they've got you in that bubble, you're there. All they need to do is to keep you there. And that's easy. They can walk by, throw you a news article, and you're done. You're wound up and you're ready to go for the day. One person who offends you, done, ready to go for the day. They don't have to waste any more time with you. You're just there. All they have to do is pop in long enough to fuel that fire. They don't have to work. And they can move on to the next person. And the thing about it is when you've got that fire burning, when you're that person, when you're in that bubble, the way that it will affect your family is that you will be that person, and you will affect your family through that lens. You'll be quick to snap. You'll be angry all the time. Your family will feel on edge because you are in this constant state. And as a result, your children will learn from you how to be angry. See, they will get angry at the things that you were angry about and the fact that they had to always feel so trapped. You know what happens when people spend all their time walking around on eggshells around other people? They get angry about it. And then lo and behold, these demons are just like, oh yeah, hey, we got you. Now the kids. Here's a little, let's get him to snap a little bit. He did it. Okay, cool. Now they're angry. Let's start feeding them. And then they leave. It's all like wind-up toys. All they need to do is to wind you up and let you go. They don't have to feed you. The world will feed you on its own. Because in every instance, the moment that anything touches that nerve, it's going to become another reason for you to be angry. Traffic will be enough. Social media will be enough.
Once anger becomes comfortable, we'll start feeding ourselves.
Exactly. And then you live in it. Then we have to start talking about other things like bitterness. So, in essence, these spirits will move you into such a way. And the thing about it is that the harder they can send you, like the more into overdrive they can send you, the more violence they can leech out of you. And that's where the thing becomes really problematic. Like, it's not just the small things. This is when you start getting the people who show up and start shooting up schools and things like that. Do you know the most common, like, what's the term? The dossier for your average school shooter? They're usually an outcast up from the community. They're usually somebody who's left to feel powerless, and they're always angry. Outcast, powerless, angry. There's more, but these are the three that I remember and are pertinent to the discussion. Because, see, the thing about it is in these instances, and there are many Christians who go through this, where they will be left feeling angry and powerless and alone. When you get into that place, and it will feed itself. like the thing about it is you might just start off angry, and then suddenly you start to find yourself more and more alone because people are walking away from you. And then that makes you more angry because you're now abandoned. And now that you're abandoned, you're more angry and you're mad at them. And then suddenly you're powerless to do anything that's going wrong with your life because you don't have anybody to back you up. Now you're angrier at them more because look what they did to you. They abandoned you. They left you in this place to rot. So what do? Well, in these instances, people will try to reacquire power in some way, shape, or form to feel powerful. And that's a lot of what happens in those instances, according to the FBI and like their research on the matter. That's usually at the heart of this. It's powerless, angry, lonely people trying to reacquire some level of power in their own lives, some feeling of control. And these spirits will take us down those roads. I have been to churches created by people who felt that way. And they took it upon themselves to become pastors because they wanted to show the church the what for, how to really follow God. And as a result, created really toxic churches where everybody was angry. It was basically just everyone collectively gathering around the pulpit to moan and...
Have the 2 minutes hate.
Huh?
Have the 2 minutes hate.
Yep. Yeah. They just sat in that state. They all came together because they hated the church, and that's what their religion was revolved around. They claimed they wouldn't be the same, but they were the same. Because hurt and anger drove them to be the same. Anyway. So, hopefully we're like clarifying the picture of where these demons kind of move us and what their kind of game plan is. It's to put you in a self-feeding state where it makes you blind and deaf to God and more capable of sin. If we're going to put it all into like into a bubble, into a nutshell, spirits of rage and wrath want to take this very powerful emotion of yours, harness it in a way that they can twist it and trap you in it. Using the power of it, they want to wrap you in it and hold you to it. And then using the offenses that they may or may not have created, that they may have or may not have founded, they want to pull you into this trap of feeling this pain and this offense and this anger all the time, and then justify you in it. Even to the point that you will look on God and tell him that he's wrong for not punishing people the way that you want them punished. At which point you then put yourself in the driver's seat for heaven. And that just increases the power, that stronghold, and that prison, as it were. And puts you in a state where you'll just continuously be fed anger and rage in a continuous cycle of just staying completely separate from the kingdom of God and anything that God is doing in order to maintain your own little stronghold of anger and eventual bitterness and eventual death. Because as we've stated in the past with all spiritual warfare, all demons aim to do these two things. They want to separate you from God, or they want to separate you from yourself. And anger can do both. It'll separate you from God when you start telling God that he's wrong for not doing things the way that you believe he should be doing and you feel they should be done. And they separate you from yourself when you become wrath and you cease to be the person that you are. See, anger being as powerful of an emotion as it is, when it overrides your other senses and the rest of your person, it will twist you and make you into a very different person. Like, it's crazy. In the 11 years that I've been running groups and serving in churches and so on, or pastoring or doing whatever, I have seen incredible transformations where I've seen people who came into the church for prayer who were just full of nothing but rage and vitriol, and watched them be delivered. And then the next time that they came in were somebody completely unrecognizable because their peace was restored. The restoration of peace to a person is an incredible thing in that it lets them finally be themselves. When I did world history, or when I took world history back in high school, I remember the teacher saying something that's always stuck with me. And he talked about how all art and invention was ultimately the result of agriculture, because people were allowed to stop looking for food. And he explained the point that when you're hungry, you can't really think a whole lot. Your only real interest at that point when you're hungry is to put food in your stomach. So it's going to override a lot of your other senses. And he explained how once people learned how to start farming their own food, they were finally able to stop and think about things. They were able to have that hunger satisfied, and they were able to pause and say, hey, how can I make this better? How can I do this better? Hey, what can I create? I feel like drawing. Do you know what drawing is? No, but we're going to do it. He highlighted this point because in the end, the point was that there was this something that made it harder for people to think and reason. And as a result, once that thing was satisfied, they were free to think about other things and to grow. This is our relationship with anger. It is in the state of peace that we truly grow the most. A chip on your shoulder can take you a long ways, but it doesn't make you grow. It holds you in that same place of anger. It holds you in that same place of needing to prove yourself. But it will not grow you. All it does is take a pawn and move them across the chessboard. It doesn't turn them into something else. So, the thing about it is, that all being said, we have to come back to the subject of forgiveness, because that will lead us directly into being able to pray for deliverance. If it's not clear already from what's been said, I'll try to make this quick. Forgiveness is paramount in being able to be free of anger, because so much of the state of wrath, wrath and rage are in so many ways the product of offense and unforgiveness. If you're holding offense in your heart, there's grounds for wrath to exist. That's what feeds it. See, the anger is fed by these outside things. And as a result, it's our ability to forgive them and let them go that will give us freedom. God can take our anger. God can take our wrath. And what I mean, and I do mean that both, like, he can handle you being mad at him, but also he can literally just exercise that emotion from your being. I know it because I've had him do it. And he can soothe your soul. But we have to be willing to give it up, which means we have to be willing to pull ourselves down from that seat of determining what justice is. And we also have to be willing to let him take it. And we also have to be willing to forgive the people or the situations or ourselves in some situations of the sins that have created the offense or the crimes that have created the offense. So that becomes that point where we have to be willing to take that thing and give it up to God and not pick it back up. Especially when it comes, if you are somebody who has been in a state of rage or wrath, and you're trying to get unlocked from that cage, as it were, you have to have the humility to recognize that you're probably not going to be the person to manage those situations. Like, we always want to be, because we don't want to have to acknowledge our own limitations. I know that for myself as a person, pride oftentimes becomes a problem for me, in that I want to believe that I can handle anything. And as a result, I have to constantly swallow it and surrender these things to God, because I have to accept that I can't be that person. Not in this situation. If I've been holding offense at somebody for like a year plus, I'm not going to be the person to fix the situation, to rectify it. Not until, like, God gives me something to do it with. Because everything I've got so far is just reasons why I'm right to be mad at them. Like, if you spend a year or more, or even just months or weeks being pissed off at people and carrying around that being pissed off, your entire perspective is going to be crafted and molded by how pissed off you were and how justified you were to be mad at them. Which means you're not really equipped to be the person to go and, like, make peace. If all you've done is, like, collect bullets and load them into your guns, you haven't even, like, gone out and bought the white flag, showing up armed for bear is not going to be a good message. You know what I mean? All you're going to be doing is looking for that one thing where suddenly you just pop off, and then there's war, which is exactly what you don't want if you're trying to forgive somebody. And oftentimes, the truth is that the people who we're trying to forgive aren't exactly repentant, which is why we take the whole situation, we lay it at God's feet, and we walk away. He can deal with it. And that way, rather than having a story about how you went and tried to fix it, and then everyone ended up in a fist fight, you instead end up with a story about how years later you walked up, you found that person, they apologized, and you saw an incredible move of God where God had actually worked on this person, brought them to church, brought them to God, brought them to himself, taught them who he was, and given both of you peace. God can play the long game better than we can. We oftentimes look for that quick validation. That's why we get so mad. It's why we see them getting blessed and we're just like, how dare you? How dare you bless them after what they did to me? Not understanding that God's got like a 5-year plan right there. He's just like, actually, I am doing what you asked me to do. It's just going to take longer than you are aware of and that you have patience for. I've lived this enough times to say this. Like, it's not a puerile statement. So, in essence, this place of being able to forgive is a must. It's also for us. Because see, the thing about it is that a lot of that like wrath and rage that's being used to feed us in that bubble is coming from those places of offense. So it's just as important for us to be able to forgive and let go as it is for that person. There's a place for us where we stop feeding that thing. You effectively start to starve it. You know, the thing about it is once that thing starts to starve, that bubble starts to dissipate, that cage starts to fall apart. It gets a little easier to see and to let go. You find that the lock to the door doesn't actually apply to you. And that's where we can be free. Because forgiveness, it's an old idiom in the church at this point, but forgiveness frees two people at once every time that you go for it. Forgiveness frees the person that you are forgiving, and it frees you from the need to forgive. And this is our thing. So, the great tool for being free from these particular spirits is to be able to forgive. Because they're going to prey on your justifications, they're going to prey on your pride, they're going to prey on your anything else. But forgiveness is humble. They can't control humility. It turns out that humility is an interesting thing, because true humility is a concept that demons don't know how to interact with. They can create false humility where you just become self-deprecating. But that's not humility. That's self-deprecation. That's like an inverse form of pride. At least according to psychologists. On the contrary, true humility removes you from the situation. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about others. It's about God. True humility with God exists in the state of accepting that God is the main character in the story, and you're the really fun side character. I won't say that you're the Robin, because nobody wants that, and I wouldn't put that on anybody. More like the Nightwing. Is that fair? For the Batman fans? You're not Aragorn, you're Merry and Pippin. And everyone likes him better anyways, so, you know, it's fair. But the thing about it is that you accept that you are not that leading character. And get okay with that. Because suddenly that releases so much of the tension on your shoulders to perform. And the reality is that if we want to get into like the things that spirits of anger will use, or spirits of rage will use in order to bury you and make you angry, we've talked about offenses caused by other people because that's the most that's the loudest. But the reality is that they can turn you on yourself by looking at your inability to perform. They can they can use pressure, peer pressure. They can use the weight of existence. They can use God himself. They can use the Bible and the need to perform according to the scriptures. Have you successfully completed each of the 10 commandments today? Have you also completed each of the Beatitudes? How about the gifts of the Holy Spirit? Have you manifested every single one of them today? No, you're a failure. Shame on you. Suddenly rage and religion are going to combine, and they're going to beat you to death with a hammer. Because they're going to give you things that you cannot accomplish on your own. And they're going to make you angry at yourself because you couldn't. And then they're going to make you believe that God's angry at you because you couldn't. And then everyone's angry at you, and it's easy to just get angry and then live in that bubble. We're right back to what we've been talking about for the past hour. So, being able to forgive is tantamount. Being able to be humble in your forgiveness is tantamount. It's all a must. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and move to the prayer part. Before we do, I want us to pause for a moment and think about those who we need to forgive. Ourselves, others. The truth is that like there's no holds barred here, right? One of the hardest ones that I've had to forgive was actually to forgive God. And understand me very clearly. This isn't because God did anything wrong. It's because people lack the comprehensive ability to accept that reality. And as a result, we get it in our heads that somebody did something wrong, and we will blame God for things that even though we can cognitively say, he was not wrong, he did nothing wrong, our emotional being cannot accept that. So we have to forgive in order to let it go. And as a result, we can find freedom. And then we can let God move in and rectify the places where we would have believed that he did something wrong. And there are a lot of people who resent God. And religiously, we say we don't. We try to make it about anything else because we don't want to acknowledge that, because that makes us, what? Prideful, arrogant, selfish, evil, different things like that. The reality is like it's purely subconscious stuff that's not even like completely within our control. And sometimes we have to accept that and then do the thing that seems off. And then when we find freedom, God can correct those parts. Because until that point in time, that resentment is going to sit there, and it's going to fester, and it's always going to create a wall between you and God. The same is true with people, the same is true with the church, the same is true with so many different institutions and aspects of life. Maybe what you resent is community. Maybe you're afraid of that. Maybe you have a deep hatred for the church as it is. Maybe you have a deep hatred for your parents, for your family, maybe doctors. I feel that one personally, often. There's a lot of different things that we can hold on to and resent. And so we pause here for a moment to kind of consider what those are and what we're willing to surrender today. Before we pray. So with that, we'll pray. I'm going to, like with the other ones, I'll run us through a prayer for deliverance from these spirits. Feel free to pray along if this is pertinent to you. If not, it's something to bear in mind. And also keep in mind those things that we just thought about as far as like things we need to forgive, because that's part of this prayer. Part of being delivered from spirits of rage and wrath is starving them of the tools that they use to afflict us. You take away the fuel, they can't feed that furnace of anger. And the thing about it is when that fuel has been surrendered to God, it turns out he's really hard to get it back from for them. So, we'll pray. Holy Spirit, I surrender myself and my emotions to you. Lord, and I forgive those who I have held resentment against, those my pride or my hatred or my self-validating have forced me to hold on to. I free them now in Jesus' name. I let them go to you. I surrender myself and them as a whole. God, free me from these spirits of rage and wrath who have controlled me, who have wound me up and let me go. Forgive me for transgressions I have committed while under their control, under their influence. Forgive me for agreements that I have made while under their influence. Forgive me for justifications I have made. Especially those that insult you by putting myself in your place. Please forgive me, Lord. I surrender it all to you. And I ask that you would resurrect your offer of sonship or daughtership. And I pray that you would accept me and renew me. In Jesus' name, amen. And that's what we got.